Hey everybody, as you can see, I'm at school today. I had the opportunity to come up and do some work because my wife was working at home. So I'm really glad to be here, but it would be way better if you were here with me. So I wanted to get this video out right off. This is a discussion of Tuesday's assignment, America and World War I Crash Course 2. All right, so let's just jump into it. I want this to take only, I don't know, give me 5 minutes. Here we go. So at the 7:15 mark is where we begin. And the question is, what did the government use its power to do? The answer I was looking for was, like never before, the government used its power to shape public opinion. The government wanted to persuade Americans to support the war. I think this is pretty clear why they'd want to do that. Easier to fight a war as a nation if you have broad support among the people. The U.S. government found out, especially in Vietnam, with an unpopular war, it makes it much more difficult to fight. Moving on. So what did the government do to get Americans to support the war? Well, they created a lot of propaganda. And propaganda is information, especially biased or misleading, that's used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. You guys are bombarded by propaganda every day. Every advertisement you see on YouTube is one form of propaganda. And the government did this to get Americans to support the war. They used pamphlets, posters, which we're going to talk about together next week, and they advertised in movies. John says that World War I may have been a war to make the world safe for democracy, but a historian said that it began or inaugurated the most intense repression of civil liberties the nation has ever known. What does that mean? World War I began a period where people's freedoms were crushed, and John gives you a couple of examples. Check this law out, the Espionage Act of 1917. It prohibited spying, getting the draft, or making false statements that get in the way of our military being successful. I get the spying, I get the interference with the draft, false impede or interfere with military success. I get a little less. It's just speech, but that's up to you and how you feel about it. John says this next law, the Sedition Act, was even more troubling than the Espionage Act. Espionage, by the way, is another word for spying. So what did the Sedition Act do? It criminalized or outlawed statements, words, that were intended to spread hatred, contempt, or shame on our government. Basically, if you're trashing our form of government. Or if the statements supported getting in the way of the war effort, okay? So John basically wants you to understand that the laws made it a crime to criticize the war or the government, something that seems very, very American to me and protected by the First Amendment. Eugene Debs felt this. He was a presidential candidate. He was convicted of giving a speech against the war. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and served 3. The constitutional principle of checks and balances allows Americans to look to the courts for help against unconstitutional laws. And that's what they argued that, like the Espionage Act or the Sedition Act, were unconstitutional, that they violated the First Amendment. However, at this time, the court didn't much help. And in Shank versus the United States, the Supreme Court upheld or okayed the conviction of a guy for encouraging people to avoid the draft. Okay? But the court went on. The court said that the government can punish critical speech, can punish speech when the speech presents a clear and present to the state, which is us. And clear means there's no question. It's a danger, and present means like right now. So clearly it's a danger and it's a current danger. The court said the government can punish that speech. What famous exception to free speech did Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes introduces is one of the only things I remember from law school, but he said, look, there are exceptions to free speech. For example, if you're in a crowded, dark movie theater, you jump up and yell, fire, fire, everybody run, that can lead to injury. So that speech can be prohibited and punished. What are students often taught that World War I led directly to? That they're often taught that it led directly to the 19th Amendment, which supported women's suffrage throughout the United States. Jeannette Rankin, she's the only person to against both World War I and World War II. She was a congresswoman. She voted against the declaration of war in 1917 and was the only representatives that voted against declaring war on Japan in 1941 after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. What incentives did World War I provide African Americans? It's called the Great Migration. There were so many job opportunities in the industrial cities of the North that thousands and thousands of African Americans moved north, referred to as the Great Migration. There's a book that covers this. I recommended it to a student today, in fact, called The Warmth of Other Suns. Check it out. The Warmth of Other Suns, the Great Migration. What did the disappointment over the outcome of World War I lead America to do? We retreated to ice again. And the ultimate failure of World War I was there was another world war. For that, because it's identified as World War I, and it led to World War II. So I hope you did well on the assignment it goes with.